just, I guess, for the sake of setting up the expectations, I'm not a food guru myself. I just happen to be around the space for about the last 7 years or so. And I've been lucky enough actually to be able to share also some of these trends and insights that we see thanks to actually a tool that we built over the years, which allowed us to effectively have a very broad overview of what is happening in the agri-food tech ecosystem. But before I do that, let me just quickly run you through what we do at Forward Fooding. We basically run a network powered by entrepreneurs that effectively has built a collaborative platform for the food and beverage industry. And we stand for a very simple mission, which is we want to empower all the ecosystem stakeholders, including, entrepreneurs, corporates, investors, accelerators, and even, food tech enthusiasts, with data and insights and connections from our global food tech network to basically foster innovations between all the different stakeholders that can help to create a brighter future of food, or at least a more resilient food system. And so how do we do this? We effectively use three main tools to do it. One is Food Tech Data, which is basically a data intelligence platform that we built called the Food Data Navigator, which now covers most of actually the ecosystem actors. And we empower our clients and entrepreneurs to effectively use the data to make sense of what is happening at the ecosystem level. Then we do consulting primarily to corporates and investors to help them to identify the latest companies, to get a broad overview of the landscape within specific verticals within the agri-food tech ecosystem. And last but not least, we foster our startup network, which is basically really our biggest asset, as we try to effectively capture all the companies that are reshaping the future of this sector through technology and entrepreneurship. Just to give you some numbers, we built London's first food and food tech innovation hub about 2 years ago, which now counts about 10 resident companies. And as Javier pointed out, we're now replicating it in Barcelona. So we just launched it actually earlier this month, and we're very pleased to see that we already have now 3 members of our hub, and we will continue to basically grow these hub platforms across Europe. Over the years, we were able to establish about 5 successful collaborations between corporates and startups. And we've run about 35 boot camps since 2015 that have involved about 520 companies over the years. Then we built our proprietary databases, which now counts about 10,000 plus international agri-food tech actors. And this includes, startup and scale-up companies, accelerators, VC, and corporate venture capital. So are all the key actors of the ecosystem. And the proprietary data database gets basically shaped up into our Food Data Navigator in the form of a license. And that's the tool that then we give access to our ecosystem stakeholders. And we're currently working with about 10 corporate clients. You see some of the logos over here. But also we've been working with Google for about 3.5 years now, curating everything that goes into their canteens and cafeterias as far as packaged innovative food products are concerned. We've been doing it for the UK and Ireland. But one of the key sort of activities that we've been running over the past 2 years is actually one thing called the Food Tech 500, which is the sort of Fortune 500 list of agri-food tech companies. And last year, we launched the first edition, and we're currently running the second edition. And this is just our kind of endeavor to raise awareness of some of the technologies that we see that have been developed by entrepreneurs. And just to give you some highlights of last year edition, these are some of the companies that topped up the list. We received about 1,200 applications. And out of those, we then shortlisted 500 companies that we thought were actually doing interesting developments in the space. These are some of the companies. So Area Farms that works in vertical farming, TIPA that works in sustainable packaging, and many others that basically we think are kind of indicative of, have developed, solutions that are quite indicative of the potential of some of these technologies within the agri-food tech ecosystem. And these are just some of our partners and supporters and clients. As you can see, we bring them all together as we basically work with them in different ways. But what I would like to highlight here is the fact that we have developed effectively a global network of also organizations like ours that you see here in the third row that effectively help us to map the ecosystem at the local level. So we have data partnerships in place with some of these organizations, and every quarter they help us to understand what's the landscape in their own region like when it comes to startups and scale-ups. But I was actually stuffed with this big challenge of trying to share in 15 minutes some of the global trends we see in the ecosystem. And what I would like to start with is actually to define what agri-food tech is all about. And given that there was no definition out there that I think is kind of universal, again, last year we tried to come up with our own definition, which we frame as the emergent sector exploring how technology can be leveraged to improve efficiency and sustainability in designing, producing, choosing, delivering, and enjoying food. So as you can see from here, the word efficiency and sustainability are, in our view, key to define, what this emergent sector is all about. And the reason being that technology has always been, I guess, been addressed as an enabler of efficiency. But we do believe that sustainability is a key part of actually this definition, because we also want to understand, and this is how we're doing it also with the FoodTech 500, how these solutions are contributing to creating a more sustainable food system. And basically, as you can see, we go from production to consumption, but even beyond. So even beyond the point of consumption, because with these days, interact also with food digitally. If you think about, all the pictures that you find on social media is about food. And so we're trying to basically understand how technologies is playing, a role in all the different gaps that need to be filled in our food system. And so just to give you some highlight numbers about the agri-food tech investment space, in 2019, we've mapped about 7,500 companies up to date. We've seen that about 59 billion euros were invested in this space by VCs primarily since 2010. And about 17 billion is the projection, again, thanks to our Food Data Navigator, that we expect the system to reach by the end of the year. And how do we do this is, as I mentioned, we basically have taken all these numbers from our data intelligence platform, which now counts about 9,700 ecosystem actors, including 5,100 companies, about 230 international accelerators and incubators, and about 4,000 plus institutional investors, including VC, corporate venture capital, as well as business angels. And what we've done to really try to make sense of the agri-food tech space is we basically developed our proprietary taxonomy, which now counts about 8 macro categories, which you can see here. So we go from ag tech, so from the field, all the way through consumer apps, food delivery, food processing, food safety and traceability, next generation food and drinks, even kitchen and restaurant tech, and then surplus and waste management. And these are the 8 macro categories that, in our view, are indicative of the agri-food tech ecosystem. But then we went a step further in actually trying to drill down these 8 macro categories into meta tags. And we now have been working with about 150 technology meta tags, including things like plant-based, soil agriculture, alternative protein, blockchain, 3D printing, and so forth. And this helps effectively the users of our platform to then identify basically companies by using these meta tags. And this is just a split by activity. So based on those 8 micro categories that I showed you earlier, this is how our current database is composed of. It's about 1,300 plus ag tech companies, then about 1,000 next generation food and drinks. So these are like new ingredients, alternative protein, and all this kind of stuff, and then so forth. So effectively, this is how those 5,000 companies are clustered using our taxonomy. And these are just some of the most represented technologies using our meta tags. As you can see from this graph, so when it comes to startups and scale-ups, about 1/3 of the pie is effectively taken by companies that are working in data intelligence, alternative protein, alternative ingredients, which are basically the yellow, orange, and red bars of this graph, and so forth. So there are many others, technologies, but these are really kind of the core of the database that we're currently working with. And if you can see, when it comes to evolution of funding, as I mentioned earlier, about 59 billion were invested in the last 10 years. But as you can see, the trend has been basically skyrocketed from 2015 onwards. And we've basically counted there was about a 247% increase from between 2016 and 2019. And this is the split by category. So as I mentioned earlier, as we monitor these companies and we cluster them into micro categories, you can see that the biggest amount of funding has actually gone into food delivery companies, which now counts for about 40% of the pie. But then also the other relevance are, I think, ag tech, as well as next generation food and drink, which, as you can see, they count respectively 1,300 companies and 980 with next generation food and drinks. And these are just some of the most funded companies. I just put the top 10, the top 20 here. But just to give you an idea of how funding has been distributed over the last 10 years. And here, as you can see, that the list is topped up by food delivery companies to begin with actually mega rounds. So companies like Delivery Hero have even raised 4.3 billion almost in capital. And these are basically kind of the outliers. So if you take out the food delivery companies out of the whole equation of agri-food tech, then you can see that the biggest actually opportunity probably lies is actually across the supply chain. So in things like next generation food and drinks or ag tech, because we see that these companies are effectively filling gaps in it. But let me spend the last 10 minutes actually talking you through some of the mega trends, so to speak, that we see. And here, I just, for the sake of time, I pick 4, but I can tell you there are many others. And they are respectively reinventing protein, so from plants to air. The reason being that we started, I guess, this space started with replicating, some companies were replicating animal proteins with plant-based protein. But then that has gone way further, and I'm sure also Mark will cover this later with cellular agriculture. But we've got even to a point where now companies are creating actually proteins from air, like literally like thin air or CO2 for that matter. But here I picked just a company called Just, which used to be called Hampton Creek. These were the first one who created basically eggs without using animals. And they replicated actually the protein by merging different plant genetics until they found basically a formula to create a product that is mimicking, effectively eggs, which you now see in the picture. But then I also picked a company that also made it into our foodtech 500 last year called Ura. These guys develop plant-based products. They started with, I guess, Folk's Chicken. But now they've developed effectively a platform to develop a number of different plant-based products, including actually burgers. And they are the only company that is now doing plant-based burgers made of actually olive oil. So they start with plant, fat, but they managed to create a product that is very similar to then, meat burgers. And then, of course, Mosa Meat, which is leveraging cellular agriculture to create meat, and Mark will explain you later what they're doing. Then I also picked Shiok Meat, which is doing actually seafood out of cell-based agriculture. So again, they are using stem cells to effectively creating fish mimics. But also Mycotechnology, which is a company playing in the precision fermentation space, which uses mushrooms to actually create protein. And these guys have developed, again, a platform that helps also other companies to develop new ingredients using mushroom-based. But also insect. So a company called Y Insect, we also recently raised a significant amount of money, has created, again, another platform to create insect-based protein for actually animal feeding as well. And last but not least, Solar Food, which is actually creating, proteins out of CO2, which created this protein called solein, which is extracted actually from CO2. Then the second trend is farming and big data, so minimize risk and optimize crops. And here I picked Aero Farms, which is a vertical farming company based in New York, but then also a small robot company, which is based actually here in the UK. And what these guys have developed is a series of automated robots that actually perform different tasks within the field, from mapping the field all the way through harvesting and even killing actually the weeds using electric shocks. So effectively, they run these different robots, and they help the farmers with a very interesting business model called farming as a service. They allow farmers to effectively rent these robots and then run them on their fields, while actually capturing a lot of data about their fields. And Hummingbird as well, which is actually using AI and artificial intelligence to map the fields of farmers using also visual imagery. And even cerca, who's actually using wearable devices to detect animals, and then through their software they can help livestock farmers to effectively detect whether some of their livestock are catching diseases, so they can predict basically the health of their livestock. And then reducing food waste. Here I picked also some more product companies like Toast, who's actually upcycling food, and in particular bread, to actually brew beers. A company called Entocycle, or it used to be called Entocycle, now called Better Origin, who's actually using black soldiers, which are a particular type of insect, a fly, to actually turn surplus food into animal feeding. So they basically feed these insects with surplus food, and those then become actually the feeding for the animals. And here you can see that even actually insects can become a technology effectively to feed then the animals. And then TIPA, which I mentioned also earlier, that is developing compostable packaging, so primarily for the food sector, but also for now fashion. And Notpla, who has really created the first edible packaging for water, which is made out of algae, so you can actually eat the packaging itself. And more on the consumer side of things, Too Good To Go, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, which now lets restaurants to actually sell unsold items at the end of the day for a discounted price. And even Impact Vision, which is using hyperspectral imaging technology to identify unknown objects on the production line. And then last but not least, direct to consumer, and I added this because of also the global pandemic. I think it's just accelerated the development of some of these companies as they're basically selling directly to consumers. And so companies like Farm Drop, who basically built a platform to deliver fresh produces from farmers to consumers directly, or even companies like Supplier, who are doing the same thing, but for restaurants. So they try to cut the middlemen by helping restaurants to streamline the ordering system and buy directly from the producers. And last but not least, Almond, which is actually a discovery platform for sustainable brands that allow then the consumers to not only discover brands that are doing good, I guess, while doing well while are doing good to the planet, but also they allow consumers to actually offset their carbon footprint by planting trees on the behalf of the consumers to basically get rid of some of the CO2 that was emitted from the products that they are actually buying. And many others, but just to kind of finish up, I think what is interesting about all these companies is that they're effectively, a lot of them are using data as a new kind of currency, right? Not only to help brands also to market, their products, but also for consumers to understand really what goes into their food, right? As some of these technologies as enablers, they're effectively helping consumers to have more visibility about the whole supply chain. And in a world where we have, things like Alexa that allows us to understand how to best, feed ourselves, or we can even ask, what we want to be fed with. I think food personalization is really becoming possible thanks also to technology, right? And this is where I think data is playing a major role and is kind of becoming the new brand. As consumers, I think have started distrusting really brands, and they want to see more tangible data that to actually make their food choices. And this is where I see that data is basically helping us to step up on the Maslow hierarchy pyramid, as we then go from like pushing, or from companies pushing food to us as consumers, to actually using data to pull food towards us, or the ones that we think is best for us. And I think there are two ways, I guess, of seeing this. As there is a whole revolution occurring, we can participate or just disregard, I guess, some of these signals of disruption. This is how we call them. And this is where we think that collaboration, can really play a major role. So we think that is becoming, the new competitive advantage, as also large companies are trying to tap into some of this innovation, and collaborating is really with some of the entrepreneurs who are building it is kind of the only way to really remain competitive. And that's really it. These are my content details. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to take them, of course, during the Q&A, but you can just also shoot me an email at alessio@forwardfooding.com.